Nancy Pelosi says peace deals are Trump's way to distract Americans. Biden speaks from a field and waves to no one. Was Netflix CEO charged with child pornography? And recap on Trump's town hall last night. All that and more on this episode of The Johnny Ray Show. Welcome and thanks for joining me on this episode of The Johnny Ray Show. We have a lot to get to. We'll recap the town hall from last night and discuss the peace deals all over the Middle East and even discuss the antics of Democratic presidential candidate, that is Joe Biden. But first, we have to discuss the dumbest, most ignorant thing to come out of Nancy Pelosi's mouth since it was a setup. So, Friday, Nancy Pelosi was in an interview with Wolf Blitzer from CNN when she was asked about her thoughts on the peace deal the Trump administration had been brokering between Israel and the UAE and a lot of countries in the Middle East. Now, why anyone would ask Nancy her thoughts on anything short of salons to try out during lockdowns, I don't know, but her response was very telling. Take a listen to this.
All right, let me make a quick turn while I have you, Speaker. The President making a dramatic announcement today on a normalization of diplomatic relations between Israel and an Arab state, Bahrain, the Kingdom of Bahrain. This follows the peace treaty that is about to be signed between Israel and the United Arab Emirates this coming Tuesday at the White House. These are dramatic developments in the Middle East. How much credit do you give the President of the United States for these peace agreements?
Well, hopefully they won't. Hopefully they will be beneficial to the region. We've been waiting for a very long time for the president's proposal for an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement that honored the two-state solution. It was coming in 2 weeks. It was coming in 2 months. It was coming in 6 months. It still hasn't come in any way that has brought peace. So. Good for him for having a distraction on a day when the numbers of people who are affected and the numbers of people who are dying from this virus only increases.
So, doing what several previous presidents couldn't do is a distraction. Democrats just can't speak one thing nice of President Trump. If this were Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton, any Democrat for that matter at all, they'd be raving at how amazing of an accomplishment this is. But then again, if it were any of them, it wouldn't happen because Democrats don't see Israel or the Israelis as people. They've actively pushed back against Israel in the past. Since about 2007 or so, Democrats began pulling away from pro-Israel policy, and by 2016 they pretty much turned on Israel altogether in favor of the Palestinian support. Kristen Gillibrand and Cory Booker aligned with Barack Obama in a far more pro-Palestinian outlook. They described the Palestinians as marginalized. I mean, if you call men and women, for that matter, that strap bombs to their small children and allowed them to infiltrate Israeli territory in hopes of blowing up as many Israelis as possible marginalized, then yeah, I guess that makes some sense. But that's not the case. The peace deal is about less overall peace and more about an alliance of sorts against Iran. The old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, rings pretty close here. Bahrain has also joined the signing, and Saudi Arabia has been hesitant but has opened airspace for personal and commercial flights between the UAE and Israel. Several other countries have stated interest in joining, including Oman and Qatar. And for Nancy or any other person to call this anything but a step in a right direction for the Middle East it's ludicrous. It's plain out stupidity. On to other top stories. This one you won't really hear on CNN because it shows what everyone already pretty much knows, but the left refuses to admit, and that is Joe Biden is the real-life, old-aged Billy Bibbit from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So he popped up a few days ago like the groundhog to tell us there's 4 more years of Trump. He did a speech in the middle of a wheat field, I believe, or something like that, in Wilmington, Delaware, which seems to be where all his speeches come from these days. I'm not sure he even realized he was in a field, though. I think he probably thought he was in Michigan at the auto plant or somewhere, but nonetheless, he decided he'd call Donald Trump a climate arsonist, whatever that means. I guess he means Donald Trump runs around in his spare time burning the weather? I don't know. But here, take a listen to this rambling.
Jill and I continued, as I suspect all of you do, is pray for everyone in California, Oregon, and Washington, and across the West as these devastating wildfires rage on, just as we hold them in our hearts, those who have faced the hurricanes, tropical storms off our coast of Florida and North Carolina, or like parts of New Orleans that in fact have just been issued an emergency evacuation order for Hurricane Sally. Floods and droughts across the Midwest, the fury of climate change everywhere, all this year and right now. Donald Trump's climate denial may not have caused these fires and record floods and record hurricanes, but if he gets a second term, these hellish events will continue to become more common, more devastating, and more deadly. And meanwhile, Donald Trump warns that integration is threatening our suburbs. It's ridiculous. But you know what is actually threatening our suburbs? Wildfires are burning the suburbs in the West. Floods are wiping out suburban neighborhoods in the Midwest. Hurricanes are imperiling suburban life along our coast. If we have 4 more years of Trump's climate denial, how many suburbs will be burned in wildfires? How many suburban neighborhoods will have been flooded out? How many suburbs will have been blown away in superstorms? If you give a climate arsonist 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised if we have more America ablaze? If you give a climate denier 4 more years in the White House, why would anyone be surprised when more of America is underwater? We need a president who respects science, who understands that the damage from climate change is already here, unless we take urgent action.
Oh, sorry. I can't help but think every time I see Biden squinting like that, I think back to the old GW days, watching him try and read a teleprompter without looking like he's reading. That is how Biden has devolved. That's what he's devolved to. Also, is everyone going to skim past the fact that he literally said if we re-elect Donald Trump, we'll have more hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, and floods? As if Donald Trump is now a weather guru who can wave his toupee around and cause natural disasters. As if Trump is sitting in the Oval Office staring at a map of the United States going, "You are on fire. You will flood. You Oklahoma, frankly, tornadoes for you." Like, what the actual crap, Joe? Like, seriously. You know, a few days ago, on Tuesday, I believe, Biden was filmed getting off the plane in Florida where he was scheduled to make a speech, where he's shown pointing and then waving as he descends from the stairs of the airplane. The camera pans with him to show nobody. I mean, he literally pointed and waved as though he was greeted by thousands of people and nobody. Not a soul. I mean, besides the limo driver and his security. Maybe he was pointing at the cow in the pasture across the way from the tarmac. I don't know. I don't know. Anyways, back to the story at hand. I'm going to go through a timeline of some things here. Okay? In 2016, there was a wildfire that swept across Tennessee. It destroyed nearly 2,000 structures, burned 18,000 acres of Tennessee. Okay? Caused $990 million in damages. Okay? In 2016, Hurricane Matthew hit Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, costing $15 billion, with a B, $billion worth of damage. Okay? There was the 2016 Louisiana flood. There was the 2016 West Virginia flood.
It was sudden. It was violent. Raging floodwaters ripping through whatever stood in its way. Houses, cars, just about everything.
Virginia, at least 20 people are now confirmed dead in a catastrophic flood disaster, the worst in 100 years. At this hour, 500 people remain trapped by those floodwaters in a shopping mall. Water so powerful they're ripping homes from foundations and sweeping away cars. NBC's Ron Mott starts us off from the flood zone.
There was a blizzard in January of 2016 all throughout the southeast, through the mid-Atlantic and the northeast. Snowfall totals in excess of 2 feet, okay? In places that there's usually never snow, okay? There was a flood in the Carolinas in 2015. There was a flood in Utah in 2015. There was a wildfire in Okanogan County, Washington, okay, in 2015. There was a flood in Texas and here in Oklahoma, as well as Kansas in 2015. Let's see, there was tornadoes all across the Midwest, Nebraska, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Illinois, Florida, and North Carolina, costing $1 billion worth of damages in 2014. They called it the tornado outbreak. Okay? There was, let's see, there was a flood in Colorado in 2013, costing $1.9 billion in damages. There was a tornado in Moore, Oklahoma, costing $2 billion, killing quite a few people. I know personally people that were affected by that. In 2013, there was, let's see, a blizzard in the whole eastern United States. There was another wildfire in Colorado in 2012. Hurricane Sandy, we all know about that, hit the whole East Coast almost, costing $75 billion in damages. $75 billion. Hurricane Sandy. There was tornadoes in Joplin that happened from May 21st to May 26th. A total of, I think, 3 or 5, something like that hit Joplin, costing in excess of $3 billion in damages to property. There was what they called a super outbreak of tornadoes along Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, Arkansas, and Virginia. 336 tornadoes hit that in that 1 year. 336 tornadoes, costing upwards of $11 billion in personal property damages. The Mississippi River Valley completely flooded way more than it normally does, costing anywhere from $2 to $4 billion estimated property damages in 2011. So, my first question of the day: when was Barack Obama ever blamed for those natural disasters that happened? When was he ever blamed? When did they ever say that Barack Obama's lack or inability to fix climate change with the snap of his fingers, for any of those, from 2011 to 2016, when was he ever blamed? I will PayPal or Cash App $100 to anyone who could show a headline of a news outlet blaming Barack Obama for the tornadoes in Joplin, or the wildfires in Tennessee, or Hurricane Matthew, or Hurricane Sandy. I will, right now, $100. I will PayPal or Cash App you $100 if you could show me the headline from any news outlet, reputable, somewhat reputable, major news outlet, CNN, MSNBC, any of the mainstream, ABC, CBS, the ABC Alphabet Gang, whatever you want to call them. I will Cash App or PayPal $100 for anybody that can show me a headline from one of them blaming Barack Obama for Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Matthew, wildfires in Tennessee, the Mississippi River Valley flooding, the tornado in Joplin, tornadoes in Moore. Right now, that's right now, $100 on the line. Also, before I forget, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe below. Make sure to hit the little bell to make sure you're notified every time a new episode airs, because subscriptions mean nothing without that little bell, apparently. Make sure to go to Spotify, Apple Podcast, SoundCloud, and anywhere podcasts are available. Now, I have actively stayed away from the disaster that is the new Netflix award-winning pedophilia film, Cuties. But now, Ted Cruz has frontlined a criminal investigation. He's demanded a criminal investigation into Netflix for the show. On the 13th, Senator Cruz tweeted this: "At Netflix's Cuties sexualizes 11-year-old girls, and it's disgusting and wrong." I mean, he's not lying. That's it. He goes on to say, "That's why I've asked Attorney General Barr to investigate whether Netflix, its executives, or the filmmakers violated any federal laws against the production and distribution of child pornography." Okay? Now, since this, there have been several accusations, one including that Reed Hastings, the co-CEO of Netflix, was arrested for child pornography, which was quickly fact-checked by Snopes, the all-knowing fact-checking website. They stated, in September 2020, as if that was a previous time, we're still kind of there, as social media users accused Netflix of promoting pedophilia due to a promotional poster for the award-winning French film Cuties, the website TorontoToday.net published an article claiming that Reed Hastings, the streaming service's co-CEO, had been arrested on suspicion of possession of child pornography. They went on to say, "This is not genuine news. Hastings was not arrested by the FBI, and the accusations circling on social media that the Netflix co-CEO was involved in child pornography are baseless and largely driven by pedophilia panic that consumed portions of the internet in 2020. I mean, it's not really pedophilia panic so much as we're trying to stop pedophilia from being produced on a streaming service that other people don't want to see on there. Okay? I don't necessarily want to turn on my Netflix to watch Shrek with my 9-year-old daughter and accidentally, well, not accidentally, because it's right on the front page, pops up 11-year-olds twerking, touching themselves, gyrating and grinding the ground in a dance routine, or clips like 11-year-old girl uses her cell phone to snap a picture of her hoo-hoo. Okay? It's not really pedophilia panic, it's stuff like this is, by definition, pedophilia. They also went on to say, TorontoToday.net is a relatively new website, but it has already been responsible for at least 2 viral hoaxes. Shortly after Black Panther actor Chadwick Boseman died from colon cancer, the website published a false report claiming that he had been poisoned. The website was also responsible for the false rumor that Russian President Vladimir Putin's daughter had died from a COVID-19 vaccine. A few days later, another article hit Facebook and Twitter claiming a Kim Martin Morrow was arrested and has him listed as a CEO of Netflix. From the investigation that I've done, which is not, by no means a deep, thorough investigation, but from what I've investigated through Google searches, is there is no such person listed to even be employed by Netflix with that name. Listen, folks, this is why you have to research. I know in 2020, research is seemingly hard to do mostly because of the national media outlets being very, very biased, but you can't rely on clickbait headlines and catchy titles, okay? Just as we yell at the left, we should follow ourselves. Now, that's not to say that Cuties isn't a grotesque display of what can only be considered softcore child pornography in the true definition of it. The casting for the film was said to have taken nearly 6 months, and over 700 girls ages 9 to 12 auditioned for the main character. 700. So 700 girls stood in front of at least the casting director and or others from the film and auditioned for a role that, again, is scantily cladly dressed at best, gyrating, grinding against the ground, basically doing a striptease without stripping. And again, nobody is the people defending this aren't looking at it like that. They're looking at it as some sort of art, and it's not. It's actually pretty freaking disgusting. And the sad thing about it is the people right now that are defending this, like, I don't have to agree with what you like, and you don't have to agree with what I dislike, but to sit and watch 11-year-old girls who are 80% naked at best dance provocatively on a stage, grinding the ground and gyrating and touching at their private parts while the camera zooms in and out on their private parts. To watch a movie where an 11-year-old child, not an 18-year-old portraying an 11-year-old, but an actual 11-year-old girl take a selfie of her hoo-hoo is downright wrong and unjustifiable, in my opinion. And I'm just one guy, but I am a guy that has a lot of people agree with what I'm saying. So obviously it's not just a one-off. Now, I know that Netflix doubled down and said that this was to shed light on the sexualization of female children, but that's like saying, hey, I want to shed light on the horrors of the crack epidemic in the 80s and 90s in the black communities, and then just taking 30 black people, dressing them up in the 80s and 90s clothes, giving them real crack, letting them smoke it, and then filming the results of them doing it. No. That's not how this works. That's not how anything works, y'all. This all stems from the way culture in this generation has sexualized girls and women. For the last 10 to 15 years, if not longer, I remember a time 25 years ago when people were mad that Marshall Mathers,
Eminem, the rapper Eminem,
did a song and everyone freaked out, calling it sexually explicit because he described having forced, unwanted intercourse with his mother. Or when he depicted a whole song to murdering his daughter's mother. And now, 25 years later, we have Wet Ass P Word as the #1 song, which has entire sections of the song depicting women as whores. As a country, we have lost our morals. We've lost the true morals of being humans and being morally good as opposed to morally ridiculous. Cardi B is no less demoralizing to women than Eminem's song in 1996. Yet, between 1996 and 2020, we as a society have decided, maybe being considered a whore isn't so bad. It's just, it's super, super sad in this day and age that we can come to that as a society. We can come to that thought process. Okay. Finally, Tuesday night, Trump did his ABC town hall, hosted by the ever-moronic George Snuffleupagus, where Trump was asked about all things, and by all things I mean mainly COVID, Orange Man bad, Trump horrible, and a tiny bit about healthcare. Here's some highlights.
My question is, if you believe it's the president's responsibility to protect America, why would you downplay a pandemic that is known to disproportionately harm low-income families and minority communities?
Yeah. Well, I didn't downplay it. I actually, in many ways, I upplayed it in terms of action. My action was very strong. Yeah, because what I did was, with China, I put a ban on. With Europe, I put a ban on. And we would have lost thousands of more people had I not put the ban on. So that was called action, not with the mouth, but in actual fact. We did a very, very good job when we put that ban on. Whether you call it talent or luck, it was very important. So we saved a lot of lives when we did that.
There were holes in the ban, and the European ban didn't come for another month.
Well, they were Americans. I mean, the holes in were if you have somebody in China that's an American citizen, we had to let them in. I mean, there were actually some people that said, well, once it got going, they said, wait a minute, that is really a heavily infected place. And we had a case where we had a lot of Americans, they probably had COVID, and we're saying, do we let them into our country? We let them in very carefully, we quarantined them, but we let them in.
Now, this is a bit of good and a bit of bad Trump. He says he didn't downplay, but he admitted it on the audio tapes that he downplayed. He admitted it in a press conference after those were released. So he did downplay it. So for him to say I didn't downplay it, you're kind of getting off on the wrong side there. Now, he is right as far as his actions go. Okay, as far as his actions, he was very correct. And I'm going to list out a few right now. On January 27th, President Trump tweeted out that he offered to President Xi Jinping to send experts to China to investigate the coronavirus outbreak. That was way back on the 27th of January. On the 29th of January, he announced the formation of the Coronavirus Task Force to help monitor and contain the spread of the virus and provide updates to the president. Okay? On January 31st, the Trump administration declared the coronavirus a public health emergency, announced the Chinese travel restrictions, and suspended entry into the United States for foreign nationalists who posed a risk of transmitting the coronavirus, for which Joe Biden specifically called him xenophobic because he was restricting travel of Chinese travel. Okay? On February 29th, the Trump administration announced a level 4 travel advisory to areas of Italy and South Korea, which were the numbers were astronomically high at the time. He barred all travel to Iran, and he barred the entry of foreign citizens who visited Iran in the last 14 days. On March 3rd, the White House announced President Trump donated his entire fourth quarter salary to fight the coronavirus. So, he took his entire fourth quarter, which this is, a lot of the liberals they don't grasp this. This man hasn't taken a salary since he's been in office. In 4 years, he has not taken a salary. Okay? He has donated every quarter salary to something. Whether it's the coronavirus this time, he donated it to charities. He's donated it to help build up the urban communities in certain cities. He's donated every quarterly salary that he's got. Okay? And he did it again to help fight the coronavirus. So all these people that are running around saying Donald Trump hadn't done anything for the coronavirus, he let 200,000 people die. He donated personal money. What have you done? What have you done besides wear a mask and look like a moron? Because I guarantee you haven't donated your entire salary for a certain quarter. He did. On March 4th, the Trump administration announced the purchase of approximately 500 million N95 respirators over the next 18 months to respond to the outbreak of the coronavirus. Okay? On March 6th, President Trump signed an $8.3 billion bill to fight the coronavirus outbreak. On March 10th, President Trump and Vice President Pence met with top health insurance companies and secured a commitment to waive co-pays for coronavirus testing. He did that. You think the insurance companies just voluntarily were like, we got enough money. We don't need people paying for co-pays for their coronavirus testing. No. They were going to keep charging people the bills. Trump and Pence went and got them to stop. They made the deal for them to stop. On March 13th, President Trump declared a national emergency in order to access the $42 billion in existing funds to combat the coronavirus. Now keep in mind, by March 13th, there were a total of 41 deaths from COVID in America and almost 1,700 cases. Okay? So there were barely double-digit deaths and not very many cases at all when he declared the national emergency. On March 13th, President Trump announced public-private partnerships to open up drive-through testing collection sites to help keep people safe. He put a pause on interest payments on federal student loans. And he also ordered the Department of Energy to purchase oil for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Okay? So, yeah, I'd say he played it up in terms of his actions. I mean, he did a lot of things, and that was just through a little bit of March. That's not even what he was doing April, May, June, July, last month, this month. It's like when my daughter falls and she scrapes her knee or her hand or her elbow or whatever. She's riding her bike, she falls off, whatever the case may be. I tell her, I say, oh, it's not bad. It's not bad. But I'm also putting Neosporin on it to keep it from getting infected. Yes, I downplay it to her so she doesn't freak out. But I'm also taking the steps to fix it so we don't have to lop off her arm at the elbow. Okay? So, the next question was about the Make America Great Again. Take a listen.
How you doing, Mr. President?
Good.
You've coined the phrase, Make America Great Again.
Right.
When has America been great for African Americans in the ghetto of America? Are you aware of how tone deaf that comes off to African American community?
Well, I can say this. We have tremendous African-American support. You've probably seen it in the polls. We're doing extremely well with African-American, Hispanic-American at levels that you've rarely seen a Republican have. If you talk about Make America Great, if you look at just prior to, and I'm talking about for the black community, you look just prior to this horrible situation coming in from China, when the virus came in, that was probably the highest point, home ownership for the black community. Home ownership, lower crime, the best jobs they've ever had, highest income, the best employment numbers they've ever had. If you go back and you want to look over many years, you could just go back 6 or 7 months from now. That was the best single moment in the history of the African American people in this country, I think, I would say.
Well, I mean, your statement is, though, make it great again. So historically, the African American experience, especially in these ghettos that have been redlined, historically, these ghettos that have systemically been set up and treated the way that they have been, the conditions of the drugs, the guns, and everything else that actually created the symptoms for what we see, that you profess to be just the democratic cities in themselves. These things have historically been happening for African Americans in these ghettos, and we have not been seeing a change. Quite frankly, under your administration, under the Obama's administration, under the Bush, under the Clinton, the very same things happen, and the very same systems and cycles continue to ensue. And we need to see, because you say again, we need to see when was that great, because that pushes us back to a time in which we cannot identify with such greatness. And I mean, you've said everything else about choking and everything else, but you have yet to address and acknowledge that there's been a race problem in America.
So if you go, well, I hope there's not a race problem. I can tell you there's none with me, because I have great respect for all races, for everybody. This country is great because of it. But when you go back 6 months and you take a look at what was happening, you can't even compare that with past administrations. When you look at income levels and a lot of things, because of the job situation where they had the lowest income, the best unemployment numbers they've ever had, the black community by far. And that was solving a lot of problems. And you know what else it was? It was bringing people together. I was starting to get, just before this was, we were having a long run of success, I was starting to get calls from Democrats that, hey, it's starting to work. Let's get together. People that you would never have thought this would have happened with. There was going to be unity, but unfortunately that was hurt because we got set back. But now, I think next year is going to be one of our best years economically.
But income equality is still, income equality is higher. So, I mean, jobs can be produced, but at the same time, in a lot of these big major cities where African Americans are underserved, under-resourced, that's an $8 job. Does not mean that they can necessarily afford to live where they have to live or where they've been living at for the last 20 years.
Well, the income inequality, which I agree with you, is a problem. I always agreed with that. But if you look under President Obama and Biden, the income inequality was phenomenal. It was record-setting. It's
terrible. Getting worse now.
Well, we're talking about a plague coming in. Before the plague, we were doing very well. Now, we will soon be doing well again because we're going to have a fantastic third quarter. You're seeing the numbers come in. I think you're going to have a GDP that's mid-20s and maybe much higher. Somebody said 35. I don't know. These are all records we're talking about. And you're going to have a very good, economically, you're going to have a very good year next year. But I agree with a lot of the things you say, but you have to look back, because we really had it going well. Had we not been hit by this horrible disease that came into our land, and all over the world, by the way, came all over the world, we would be in a position where I think income inequality would be different. It was really getting there. We were really driving it down,
we have to move on. But even before the pandemic, the average black family was earning half of what the average white family was earning, even if you hold education constant.
You're right. I can only compare it to the past. The African American, the black community was doing better than it had ever done by far, both in terms of unemployment, home ownership, so many different statistics, even in terms of
But there was still a gap between blacks and whites.
I mean, there was a gap, but we were doing a good job. It was getting better. And then it was artificially shut down by this disease that came onto our land.
You know, I absolutely hate when people use this type of idiocy when attempting a gotcha moment on Trump or conservatives or Trump supporters. America statistically was far better before than it is now in some sense. Some senses, it was better. For example, in the black community, they boasted a some 85% two-parent household. Two-parent household until 1960s, when ironically, LBJ initiated the Model Cities program. 1965 is when he did that. After that, the two-parent household numbers in the black community plummeted. As of 2018, that number was 13%. 13% of the black community has two parents in the household. In 92, 37% of American kids were raised in non-family households. That's foster care, adoptive, etc. You know, all the ways that no bloodline family member was in the home. Half of that, more than half, is what the statistic states. More than half of that 37% were black children. So when looking at statistics, the black community was pretty great as far as the family goes back then. Not so much now. Now, that's not saying that other parts were great. Obviously, you know, segregation, bad. You know, that's not great. But some parts were great. Like the two-parent household was great. But what people need to realize is that the Make America Great Again slogan, the MAGA slogan, it's not depicting a time specifically. It's depicting a general outlook on values, morals, and decency. There was a time when people valued a moralistic outlook on life. There was a time when people valued America over race. I remember on September 11th, this entire country, for the most part now, came together with one common outlook: that foreign terrorists came into this country and attacked us, and we stood together, black, white, Latino, Asian, etc., 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 side by side, and condemned the actions and vowed to stand and defend this country because we were American. Not because we were black, not because we were white, not Latino, not Asian. We were Americans. That is what Make America Great Again is depicting. A time like December 8th, the day after Pearl Harbor, when Americans stood together in the face of a horrendous attack and said, "We will defend this land." That is what MAGA depicts. Okay. The next question was about citizenship. Take a listen.
Thank you so much. Hi, Mr. President, Mr. George. Hi, everyone. My name is Flor Cruzeta. Sorry if I can't hold my tears.
I love what you just did.
I came in 2006 with my mom from Dominican Republic. Sorry.
That's all right. And just take your time. That's fine. George has plenty of time, I hope, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Did you say your mom got COVID?
We came from Dominican Republic in 2006 to live our American dream. But she forgot how to take care of herself. And she died last month. Sorry.
Terrible, and that's okay. It's okay.
She have breast cancer, but it made metastases on her brain, bone, and lungs. And she passed on the 19th. One of her biggest dreams was to become a citizen to vote, and she did. She did 10 days before she died, and I did it too. She pushed me so hard to do it, and I did it this past 28. I'm here because of her. She was supposed to be here and ask you and thank you for the stage you take during this epidemic. You made people closer. We lost our job, but we learned how to love our family. So I'm saying that from her.
Very nice.
Her question for you was, because she wrote this question, what would you do for our immigration system? What would you change to make more people like me and like her to become citizens and vote?
So we are doing something with immigration that I think is going to be very strong, because we want people to come into our country, people like you and like your mother. And that just shows how vicious the COVID is, especially when you have another problem. You have a heart problem or another type of a problem. And it's a very sad story. But we want people to come into our country. We want them to come in, a lot of people, but we want them to come in through a legal system, through a system that They love our country. They work to come into our country, a merit system. And we're working on something very hard right now, and in a very short time we're going to be announcing it, and I think it's going to have quite an impact. I think it's going to be something that actually will be popular for all. I mean, as far as your situation with your mother, that is just devastating, because I can imagine how you feel. And sounds like a great woman, and I'll tell you, I'm pretty good with people. She gave us a great daughter, a great child. What she's done with you, the way you are, the love that you have for your mother, I can see that. It's hard. And so many people, and they die alone. They die alone because this is such a vicious thing. You can't go there and hold their hand. You can't give them a kiss goodnight. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And hopefully the vaccines are going to be very soon. Hopefully. Did you have COVID? You didn't have it, right?
No.
You didn't have it, your mother. We'll have it taken care of. It's going to get taken care of. The vaccines are going to make a big difference. What has made a big difference is remdesivir. We have many things now, and things are going to be announced, which frankly, if you take a look at some of the things we're doing in terms of, the word wouldn't be cure, but the word would be therapeutically or therapeutics. We have some incredible things happening, which is so important. And I view that actually in a certain way as more important than the vaccine, where you can go into a hospital and get your mother and give her a transfusion or a shot, and they can get better much faster. So we have some of those things, and they've been very, very successful, but we have others coming out. And in order to get them, we had to get the FDA to approve this product, these, very sophisticated medicines, and I guess you could call them a medicine, but we had to get them approved very quickly, and they did it. Dr. Hahn, the head of the FDA, Alex Azar, they've really done a fantastic job. I believe, George, that none of this would have happened in another administration. And I think you know that. The FDA is approving things at a level that they've never done, and at speed with which they've never acted.
I love how Trump distinguishes the difference between legal immigration and illegal immigration. That's what liberals seem to conflate all the time. They conflate the two and say, well, if you're not for completely open borders, then you're against immigration. No. I like legal immigration. Do I think that our immigration system needs a little bit of revamping? Do I think that it should take 25 years for a person to get a legal citizenship? I do believe that we need to change that. I think that we should have a quicker turnaround rate when it comes to legal immigration. But do I think that we should have completely open borders where just any old Joe Schmo can stroll into the country and live here? No. I don't. I don't think that. I think that you should go through the process. Do I think the process should take 25 years? No. I don't. But you can't tell me that it's either completely open borders or completely shut borders. That's not how this works. That's not how anything works. I'm all for reforming the immigration process, but I'm not for reforming it to where just anybody can stroll in and plop in a house and do what they will. That's just not intelligent. Okay, so the next one was a question, more of an attack, but we'll go into that here in just a minute. This lady was asking about the Atlantic hit piece that they put out, saying that Donald Trump had disrespected the military. Take a listen to this.
Unfortunately, so I did. Good evening, Mr. President. So I'd like to ask regarding your recent comments about our United States soldiers and referring to them as suckers.
Could you say that again?
Our United States soldiers, referring to them as suckers, and particularly the late John McCain, our prisoners of war, as losers.
Okay. It was a fake statement.
And
go ahead.
Recently requesting to ban amputee veterans from a military parade. How do you expect to win back the support of our military, their families, their friends, and military supporters?
It's easy, because I never made those statements. They were never made by me. They said I stood over the grave of soldiers killed many years ago, and I said they were suckers. I never made that. Do you know we had 26 people as of today come out to say it never happened, and many people were there? Then they said about the rain didn't happen, and that wasn't the reason. The Secret Service said, we have a statement from them, they said that we could not travel because the helicopter couldn't be used. We would not be able to travel, because when you do that through a major city, it takes them days to get it prepared. I wanted to go anyway. I said, let me just go separately in a car in disguise. I don't care. I wanted to be there so badly. But the statements never happened. They were lies. As far as John McCain, I was never a fan of John McCain. I never thought he treated our vets well. He didn't do the job. I was never a fan of his. And I think that's fine, and everybody knows that. And I said it to his face. I was very much up on that. But as far as
he's not a war hero,
I have done so much for our vets and for our military. I rebuilt our military. Our military, when I came into this great office, our military was depleted. It was in the worst shape it was in probably ever. It was depleted. The planes were old and broken, the ships, everything. You see what I've done. I've rebuilt $2.5 trillion. And you think that was easy getting that money from Democrats? Because they don't like the military. This magazine came up. They made up this quote. It was a made-up quote. And, you know, the gloves are off with Biden, who I've never respected greatly. I've never respected him greatly. But when they took this made-up quote that was now knocked out by over 25 people, and they made an ad out of it, I thought it was a disgrace. Do you know what disinformation is? That's what it was. They made up a phony quote, and then they went with it. It was a phony deal. And the one who started it was a big friend of President Obama and Clinton. And it was a phony deal from a not very successful magazine.
Mr. President, you have used language like that in the past. You did say that John McCain wasn't a war hero, and notably silent in the wake of this article were General John Kelly, who was your chief of staff at the time. General James Mattis, who served as defense secretary for you, has said you're...
They didn't hear me say that.
Has said you're... Well, I'm getting to a broader point.
Because I never said
with the generals. General Mattis said you're a divider, you're not trying to unite the country. General Kelly said he agreed with that. John Bolton, who was your national security advisor, said you're a danger to the country. The people in these top military positions who serve most closely with you have said you're unfit for office. How do you respond to that?
These are people that I let go. These are disgruntled former employees, to put it in a nice way, with a term people would understand. Mattis was a highly overrated general, didn't do the job, didn't do good on ISIS. I took over 100% of the ISIS caliphate. I had the people that I wanted in. Mattis was fired, as you know, by President Obama, and I fired him also.
He says he resigned.
He didn't resign. I said, give me a letter. No more. Give me a letter. I was being nice. One of the problems when you're nice, oftentimes it comes back to hit you. I said, Jim, give me a letter. It's time for you to move on. He gave me a letter, but I fired him. That's called, I fired him. Now, General Mattis didn't do the job. I wasn't happy with him. If you look at John Bolton, all he wanted to do is blow people up. He wanted to go to war with everybody. And frankly, I used him very nicely. I bring him into a room in a negotiation. When people saw them, they said, oh, wow, he's going to go to war. I'm bringing our troops back from Afghanistan. I'm bringing our troops back from Iraq. We're almost out of almost every place. You know, everybody said, because of my personality, they said he'll be in a war immediately. Look at North Korea, how that's worked out. We haven't, the sanctions are on, everything's the same. We haven't spent anything. We're getting along with them. I get along with Kim Jong-un. That was supposed to be a war. If President Obama were president, if Hillary Clinton never got in, that would be a war. We would have a war, probably a nuclear war with North Korea. In the meantime, I'm getting calls all the time from friends of mine in South Korea. Thank you. We love you. Thank you. It's really been rather amazing. So instead of wars, everybody said, look at what we had today with the United Arab Emirates and UAE. And just take a look at what happened with Israel today. With that, take a look at what's going on. That was going to be a problem. We're actually creating peace in the Middle East without blood staining our sand. So but look at what happened with Bahrain.
Jim Mattis.
George, look at today what happened with Bahrain. Look at what. Well, a guy like Jim Mattis would have disagreed with the way I went about it, and I've turned out to be correct. Tom Friedman of the New York Times wrote incredible, glowing articles. last week about this incredible thing that I've been able to do in the Middle East. A guy like Jim Mattis could have never done it because they were all doing it the old-fashioned way. They were going in the wrong outlets and the wrong doors. And what happened today with UAE and with Bahrain and with Israel, people don't even believe it. And George, as sure as you're sitting there, I have numerous other countries in that region that are going to be signing very soon also. You'll have peace in the Middle East. And this is without war and without losing, and I'm talking about on both sides, but without losing our great young soldiers. You know, I go to Dover and I greet oftentimes soldiers coming in and they're dead. And there's no sadder thing than to sit with a widow or a mother and watch these big, massive cargo planes and that back opens up and these incredible Marines are walking off a casket and they were killed in the Middle East. And in many ways, nobody even knows why. Going there was the worst decision in the history of our country. We've spent $8 trillion and we've lost thousands of lives, but really millions of lives, because I view both sides, okay, if that's okay. Millions of lives. This was the worst decision. And by the way, Iraq did not Saddam Hussein did not knock down the World Trade Center, in case you don't know. I'm sure you do know that. They said they had weapons of mass destruction. They made a mistake. So we're now $8 trillion. We've been in there for 20 years, almost 20 years. In Afghanistan, I guess it's getting very close to that. It's over 19. And we're bringing our soldiers back home. Nobody expected that from me. And people are so happy about it. And you know who's the happiest of soldiers? I see them all the time. What do you think? Should we be here? No, sir, you shouldn't be here. Why? They don't like us, sir. And I'll tell you what, I've rarely met a soldier that's over there. They're better than anybody because they can tell you better than anybody what's happening. Rarely do I meet a soldier that says we should be there. It was the worst mistake, the most costly mistake in the history of our country, going into the Middle East.
You know, George, you just further push the fact that Democrats are mentally deficient. Really. I mean, Trump says, I never said those things. Then in pops Georgie, the marionette without the strings, saying, you've used this rhetoric before. He brings up the McCain talking point, that he talked about McCain not being a war hero. When Trump says, but I never said this, talking about what the lady was asking about, and George's response is, but I'm getting to a broader point. No, dum-dum. The question was about the Atlantic's article. Not about just in general. It was about the article, which I don't know if you pay attention to the news, but I pay attention to some of it. And there was like 25 people that debunked it, that said he never said that, including John frickin' Bolton, who just recently released a book showing how much he hated President Trump. Now, of course, General Mattis spoke against Trump, but he wasn't even around for the event in question. Period. So shut up. I don't understand this. Okay, so I think the last one that we have here is about the racial injustice, and she asks about George Floyd and Jacob Blake and Breonna Taylor. Take a listen.
Hello, Mr. President. Martin Luther King Jr. once famously wrote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." In the light of the ongoing protests surrounding the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the recent shooting of Jacob Blake, do you feel racial injustices are occurring in this nation? And if so, what can be done to address them?
Well, I think they were tragic events, and I do feel that we have to also take into consideration that if you look at our police, they do a phenomenal job. You'll have people choke, make mistakes, and they happen. It happens where they have to make a fast decision and some bad things happen. And you also have bad apples, but you have 99% great people. I know the police forces very well. I think almost every one of them, if you look, I've been endorsed by so many of them. And these are great people. And I will say this, if you're going to stop crime, we have to give the respect back to the police that they deserve. They've done a fantastic job in so many locations, but then bad things happen. Look at New York. New York was a very safe city. Rudy Giuliani did a fantastic job. The city was safe, and then all of a sudden we have a mayor who starts cutting the police force, and crime is up 100%, 150%. I saw one form of crime up 300%. So I think it's very important, whether you talk Seattle, where they have very good police, but they're not allowed to do their job. You have to allow the police to do their job. I agree with you. Those events are terrible, but we have to allow the police to do their job. Otherwise, crime is going to soar. Now, the problem is that in Democrat, usually liberal Democrat-run cities, we have tremendous problems. The top 10 most unsafe cities are run by Democrats. You go into the top 25 and top 35, almost every one of them is run by Democrats. No cash bail, just weak policies on crime. We have to give the police the respect that they deserve, and we have to give them their mojo. We have to let them protect us. How about that horrible crime that took place 2 days ago, where this terrible human being walks up to a police car with two people sitting in the car, and he starts shooting bullets right through the glass, right in their face, and just has destroyed. I mean, I hear they're going to make it, but they're going to have a hard time ever being the same.
Mr. President, you're right.
And it's just a terrible thing.
That was monstrous. There's no question about that. But a lot of people look at the statistics.
But that's a lack of respect. When somebody can do that, that's a lack of respect. There's no retribution. They feel there's no retribution. This guy walks up to a police car and he starts shooting point-blank range at two innocent people. You can't let that happen. You have to be very tough on crime when it comes to things.
Tough on crime, but also obey the rules and regulations for policing. And you talk about police choking. You talk about bad apples. But a lot of people look at the statistics. Black Americans more than 3 times more likely than white Americans to be killed by police. And that indicates that this just isn't bad apples. This just isn't choking. This is a real systemic, endemic problem. Do you believe that? What will you do to address it?
So I just saw a poll where African Americans in this country, black communities, are 81% in favor of having more police. They want more police. They want protection. They suffer more than anybody else by bad police protection. All minorities, whether it's Hispanic or black or Asian, they suffer more than anybody else, George. We have to give the police back the authority to stop crime. When you have something like in Portland where it's just night after night, I could stop that with the people we have in a half an hour if they'd let me do that. But they don't.
What would you do?
Bring in the National Guard. We'd bring it in and we would stop that within, well, we did it in Minneapolis. Take a look at Minneapolis.
But how do you stop police killing blacks at 3 times the rate of killing whites?
I can only say this, that the police in this country have done generally a great job. There are crimes, there are problems, and there are chokers. They choke under pressure. I mean, they have 1/4 of a second to make a decision. And sometimes they make a wrong decision, and that's a terrible thing. The problem is that'll be on the news for 2 weeks or 3 weeks in a row, and the hundreds of thousands and thousands of good acts, you know, nobody talks about.
So you didn't think that's a sign of systemic racism?
No, I think there's problems, but I also think there's some very big problems where if you don't give the police back their authority, right now, police are afraid they're going to lose their pension. They're going to lose their job if they talk to somebody in the wrong way. When I watch New York, you know, the New York City police endorsed me. And I love them. They're
one
great
group
people.
of the New York City police.
But I watched 6 months ago policemen walking down a street and people were dumping water on their head. They had absolutely no fear. There was no retribution. I thought it was a low point. I thought it was a low point for New York City's finest. And frankly, those cops should have turned around and really done something.
Now, you know, he's absolutely right, okay? When you take away the respect for laws and law officials, crime takes over. Just look at New York City. When de Blasio defunded the New York Police Department, now violent crimes rose over 300% over the course of a weekend. I mean, I'm so sick of people screaming racial injustice and canonizing the likes of criminals like Rayshard Brooks, George Floyd, Jacob Blake, etc. Insert whichever one you want to put here. These people are criminals who made a decision that led to their death. Rayshard Brooks resisted arrest and fired an officer's taser at his face. Okay? George Floyd took enough fentanyl to comatose an elephant. And then he laid on his face instead of sitting in an air-conditioned cop car with the windows down. Jacob Blake resisted arrest. He violated a restraining order. He allegedly sexually assaulted a woman. He violated the restraining order. That is actual fact, because the restraining order was in effect, and he was at the lady's house who had the restraining order on him. And then he ignored police who told him several, and by several I mean 20 to 30 times, to stop, and reaches in the vehicle, and bazinga! A knife was found where he was reaching. Go figure. Breonna Taylor was dating a drug dealer who shot at the police. Regardless of why he shot at the police, regardless of why the police were there to begin with, they knocked. They then, which they didn't have to do because it was a no-knock warrant, they even went above and beyond and knocked on the door. Then when they entered the residence, they announced themselves, according to everybody who was there, they announced themselves that it was the police, which they didn't have to do, and he shot at them through the wall, or the door. It's still kind of conflicting on how that happened. And when returning fire, she was shot. Now, should she have died? No. But she also shouldn't have been dating a known drug dealer. The left has made a bad habit of satanizing. I don't know, is that a word? I don't know. I said it, so it is. They've made a history of satanizing criminals. Why not give sainthood to Cannon Hinnant, the little boy who was simply riding his bike in his front yard and got shot in the head by his neighbor? Why not give sainthood to Ryan Whitaker, the 40-year-old man who was shot in his Phoenix apartment doorway while putting his gun down like the cops told him to? You know why they won't? It's because these two were white people. You know, Trump is partially wrong in his answer. He said there is no race issue. There is. It's anytime a black man is shot, it's racism, and anytime a white person is shot, it's crickets issue. Period. That's the issue. Honestly, the rest of the town hall was just basic stuff. I did notice a lack of pro-Trump people, or even Trump-leaning people. Almost every question was anti-Trump or I don't care either way kind of folk. So, my second question of the day: do you think Joe Biden's town hall on Thursday will be anything, or will it just be him reading teleprompted responses to scripted questions he knew beforehand? I think the latter. Be sure to comment below, Facebook, or tweet your answers to The Johnny Ray Show on Facebook or at JRay918 on Twitter, and I'll start reading my favorite answers live. And that's all the time that we have for tonight, folks. Thank you for joining me on The Johnny Ray Show. Be sure to tune in Friday, where I'll have a recap of the Joe Biden town hall and all the current news. Until then, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, anywhere audio podcasts are available, and of course on the YouTubes. Until Friday, good night, and God bless.